All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your patience with the food. We're glad that you're getting stuffed. There's extra food, so feel free to go get seconds. First off, we want to thank Pluralsight for hosting us today, and also thank Pura and Torus for providing lunch today. And it's not their fault it's late, I promise. But we are really excited to be on the stage again and have you all here with us. We haven't had an in-person event for a while, and we're really excited to talk about some upcoming events we have at Product Hive. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben to talk about that.
Yeah, so we have a few upcoming events in April. Next Thursday, we have Jennifer Moore, who is going to give us a talk about how to retention-proof yourself. We also have another event coming up in May that is a panel with Josh Penrod, Taylor Palmer, Lauren Treasure, to talk about similar topic of how to recession-proof yourself, as well as how to deal with the market that we currently are in today with layoffs and finding a job. So some really good events coming up. We have a few more. We'll have one pretty much every 2 weeks going forward this year. We're excited to kick off a lot of new events for Product Hive. I also wanted to say that thank you to Pluralsight again. We actually have some leftover bags from Front. For those that know the Front conference, we have some leftover bags from Front when Pluralsight sponsored. So we have enough bags back there for 60 people. I haven't done a count of how many people, so take a bag. Enjoy it, give it to someone else in need if you don't need it. But also wanted to mention the conference is coming up the end of April 26th through 28th. So if you don't have tickets, or we encourage you to go to that as well. So there'll be hundreds of people there to network as well. So excited about boosting the events for Product Hive. Excited about this event, this panel, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you everyone for being here.
Let me see that backpack. Let me see this. Also, you need one of these. It's Cotopaxi, so they're not just cheap backpacks. All right, so we're going to pass the time over to Eileen Chang from Pluralsight, who's going to kick off the event.
All right, hello. Can everyone hear me? Oh, welcome. It's so excited to see so many faces here and online as well. So really glad everyone can make it out. Before we get started, I do want to say thank you to a few folks from Product Hive and crew for putting this together. So Jeremy Banks, Danny Gonzalez, Nick Boulanger, and Gil Lee as well for all your help preparing this. So thank you. Give a round of applause to the event organizers, please. Cool. So we are here to talk about cross-disciplinary approaches for hardware, firmware, and software. I'm super excited about this topic and really honored to have an opportunity to facilitate the conversation with Nate Walkingshaw and also Bruno Lima. I want to give some brief introductions before I invite them up on the stage. But one thing, Nate, just want to highlight here, was a mentor of mine. So this is awesome to have this opportunity to connect with him. Nate is a passionate inventor, serial entrepreneur, passionate about building purpose-driven products that solve systemic problems, and has had a really exciting career. I'll let him talk about it when he gets up here. We'll do that. And then currently the CEO of Torus. So, and then Bruno Lima, CEO of Pura, born and raised in Brazil, leading fragrance market globally. And also fun fact, by the way, Gil put this here and I thought I would call it out. Obsessed with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, trains 5 to 6 days a week. So you should tell us a little bit about that when you get up here too. So I'm going to invite them both to the stage now, and round of applause for our guests. Grab a mic.
I was hoping you get the middle seat.
You can thank Gil for that. Let's do a quick test.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
You good?
Push the button. If it's red, there you go. You got it.
That was a test for product.
Ah, we got it. We're on.
There
We're
we
on. All right. So Nate, can you start? Just tell us a little bit about your career experience and how you got where you are now. Like, how did you get into this space?
Yeah. So the Cliff Notes version is born and raised in Utah, but my whole entire career started out as an emergency medical professional in Salt Lake City. The whole kind of, I think, foray into product or entrepreneurship started really in the back of an ambulance. I saw a huge need for fire and EMS workers. If you know anything about the fire and EMS space, most of the products that are invented for that space are really invented for the patient and improving patient outcomes, but really people didn't think about caregivers. And our ambulance cot was a thing that was a big deal for me because you have to use basically a folding ironing board every single day. And you have to lift and lower really unhealthy patients every single day. And so that kind of launched me into a hardware and firmware experience, really hardware and software. So I invented an ambulance cot and a hospital evacuation sled and a stair chair and a whole bunch of other products, that live in the back of ambulances, and eventually sold that company to Stryker and ran global R&D there. And Stryker's big company. Is a huge wake up call for me. I was 29 years old when I sold that business, and it was 8,000 employees, 16 billion in revenue, and ParaMed here in Utah was 335 employees. And so I learned a lot about scale of manufacturing, scale of production, scale of how to run a huge team on a multinational product line. And then after that, had a couple of other stints in software, and then I worked at Pluralsight. And that was that was an amazing experience. This is actually the first time I've been back in this building. I've never been here before. So it's really, really amazing to come back and walk through this building. When I had left, it was like maybe 35 or 40 days after we occupied. And so I never got to come back through, and it's amazing. It's amazing to be here. So just super grateful for this team, but I'm really grateful for the people in this room and this community. I absolutely love the Product Hive community. I think you guys know that. And thanks for coming and being here and wanting to learn and share knowledge and connect. It's really, really special. So thanks.
Yeah. Bruno, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, yeah. So I don't have as great credentials as Nate. Kind of lucked my way into it. No, so I'm originally from Brazil, as was mentioned. I moved to the U.S. when I was 9 years old. I had the obvious career path of being a janitor, and so our family didn't speak English, didn't have all the opportunities. So grew up cleaning. So when I got into college, I actually started a commercial cleaning company. Ended up growing that, learning a lot of the do's and don'ts of business through there, and ended up selling that company. At the time, I was studying manufacturing engineering, working with mechanical engineering, working some international business. And then my co-founder, Richie, and I started Pura, which was this idea of me being from Brazil and he having served an LDS mission in Brazil. Understanding the consumer space of fragrance is very, very huge in Brazil, and seeing a huge pain point in the American and the global market of this aspect of like, there's an IoT for everything. There was not an IoT at the time. This was about 8-9 years ago, IoT for home fragrance. And so we jumped in with a horrible idea that we pivoted, and kind of landed to where we are today. And so I joke that we lucked out, but in some ways, enough pivoting will get you some luck. And so it's kind of where we got to where I am.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So I'd be curious, can you share a little bit more about how you got into this space, working in hardware, firmware, software? Like, what appealed to you? I'll let either one of you jump in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't zero intention. I had zero intention. It was more like you had to have it in order for it to be successful. And that was like a roadblock that I didn't really realize. So this ambulance cot, for instance, or actually I'll use a stair chair. A stair chair, when you're a paramedic and you have to take someone down a flight of stairs, you're trained to use actually a chair, like one of the chairs that you're sitting on. And that's pretty difficult to do.
the idea is that we put essentially tank tracks on the back of that chair that would fold out, and then you could just, with two caregivers, very elegantly, very safely take someone down a flight of stairs. It was safer for the patient, and it was also safer, for the paramedics. The one challenge, though, is that we had to go like out of basements quite a bit. So nobody had thought about how to power a chair up a flight of stairs. And that is a huge pervasive problem. And that's actually where the vast majority of injuries happen, because you're blind when you're walking up a flight of stairs. So coming up with a mechanical version, that was fairly easy. Coming up with an electromechanical version, very difficult. And that's because of the interface between the human being and the product. And so you have to do a lot of engineering cycles through, through an IoT interface, and it's called a potentiometer. But basically, when a paramedic puts their thumbs on this little button, the speed at which the motor engages with a life-threatening, patient matters a ton. And so you spend years and years and years thinking about the rate at which you would take someone up a flight of stairs, the rise and run of those stairs, the weight of that patient, the different ambient conditions, what it has to be rated, how you have to test it. And so you just get an MBA in hard knocks in IoT hardware just because of the innovation cycle that it takes to interface a product with a human being.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what I'm hearing you say was really just about solving the problem, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What about
Ditto.
you?
No, I mean, I honestly don't know how much I can add to that. I think the one thing I'll just echo that I feel like Nate hit on here is just this aspect of like, I think IoT is a double-edged sword. And so I think a lot of times, just as I think app is a double-edged sword, like sometimes there's really cool hype words that people hear, IoT, let's do IoT, if you can make it smart, make it smart. And I think what Nate was trying to get across there that I wholeheartedly believe is that sometimes you need to have an IoT product. Sometimes you need to have a smart product. Sometimes you need a hardware product. Sometimes you don't. And if you don't do it, right? If you can get away without doing it, then don't. But it gets to a point where with Nate's current company, definitely Torus, but even Pura, where it's this aspect of you get to a certain point where it's like, this is the reason why you need to add IoT, why you need to do these things. And that's the point that you do. That's kind of where I've seen the necessary and like how we got into it and how I moved into this aspect is it was a necessity at the time.
Yeah, so can I build on this? So one use case that you guys, one thing that Pura does well that you can associate to, like how many people have Nest or ecobee thermostats by raise of hands? Yeah, so that's probably 75% of the room. The one thing that was beautiful about that thermostat, like from a manual version, right, is that IoT products, and much like Pura does, they allow you to reach into the future. So like if I was traveling, from one location to the next and my house was 68 degrees and I want it to be 72 degrees, like that's not happening till I get there. And I have to wait until the ambient temperature of my house rises. And what Nest and ecobee ultimately innovated is they connected IoT products and then allow me, based off my drive time, to reach into the future and turn up the ambient temperature of my house. Like that is insanely beneficial. That's not even thinking about the environmental beneficiaries there. Like you can do a ton of things with creating your house as a thermal battery, right? And then help the environment out or look at different, charging cycles and times of those things. So, the use case matters a ton. And that's a really cool concept of why that was a huge innovation, I think, for society.
Yeah. What are some of the other companies out there that are doing this well in the space?
In IoT or just the hardware, firmware, software?
Hardware, firmware, software.
I hate to say this because it's a dumb answer because everyone's like, I've heard it, but there's a reason why you've heard it. It's because it works. Apple, right? I mean, like you look at the product, and obviously I'm a fanboy, but it's just this aspect of like, I feel like the experience throughout all the different products experience that actually integrates so well, and the way it connects, moving into the home, moving outside of the actual device, moving to your own space. I mean, they've nailed that experience. It's in some products you can tell what is hardware, what is firmware, what is software, and it feels janky. With Apple, it all feels like one seamless experience. And again, I understand it's like people are like, I've heard this before, but it's like it works and it's a great experience, and that's why people talk about it, because it is great, right? So it's like I don't want to not talk about it because it's great. So it's I think it's an easy answer for me.
I mean, I don't know how much you guys are paying attention. We could use consumer-based examples, but like I look at, 10% versus 10xers. Like, so what's the 10x that I think is pretty cool to look at? I don't know if you guys are paying attention to electric vertical takeoff vehicles, like the full Jetsons era, but like I am a huge fan of the application of IoT flying cars. Eventually would be pretty cool. I mean, we've mapped airspace for, I don't know, 75 or 80 years, 10,000 feet and above. Drones, the evolution of drones is, incredible. And then you could get an environmentally friendly. I get to reach into the future, and I think would be safer than combustion vehicles or electric vehicles over time. So I'm loving the electric vertical takeoff vehicle space a ton. You have probably 6 manufacturers that have been working with the FAA for the last decade, and I think we're going to see start to come on the market, and it's going to change. I think it's going to change like urban travel. I think even from here down to St. George is going to be a pretty amazing. It'll be a single stop at 220 miles an hour, and yeah, it's amazing. Almost fully automated.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Nate, this question is for you. You were an early pioneer in this space, and you talked a little bit about your previous experience with the ambulance cot. Can you talk a little bit about what were some of the challenges and successes that you faced as you went through the process of building that product?
Yeah, I mean the short answer here is me. Like I was the problem. Most of the time when you go, and most of this room is product management, user experience design, engineering. When you set out to solve a problem, the biggest problem I think I faced in my career is getting myself out of my own way. I always talk about inventing a problem for me, not inventing a problem for we. And so the first products that I engineered were just like a great solution for a non-problem. I was like a very passionate entrepreneur who saw a problem specific to my needs. I invented that product, took it to market, and literally, this is no joke, you guys, I ended up in a motorhome on the side of my parents' house with a family of 3. Like, it was a disaster. It was just the wrong application, and I'd worked really hard. I'd saved a ton of money. Like, it was $200 a paycheck for almost 4 years. And I took this product into the fire and EMS field. I took it to New York, and I thought these people would behave like Salt Lake City paramedics. And I put tracks on the bottom of this cot. I got to the bottom of the stairs, and literally like this entire crew off this New York City fire station is like, how in the world am I going to get that cot with those tracks up those flights of stairs? It's all brownstone apartments. They're super narrow. They're super tight turns. Like the application was like, we're never going to do this. I'm like, what? No. And so I literally, as a, if you guys would have watched me as a young entrepreneur and a product, person, I mean, I not that I probably maybe would have gone to blows, but I mean, these are 4 New York City firefighters. They would have worked me over, but I was bummed. Like, I mean, I was on the side of the street trying to compel them that they were wrong. Like, this was the right application, the right solution, and tried to explain. The last funny one here is I went to Florida, and Florida, like the water table's too high. So they don't even have basements. I didn't know that. I didn't know research. And so it's like, oh, okay, like some states are too cold, some states are too narrow, some states don't even have like the use case that I designed the product for. So, that's why human-centered design or like talking to customers is a huge deal. If you're an N of 1, like a first-time user experience product, you have to make a lot of guesses and a lot of assumptions on the products that you build the very first time. Like, talking to customers actually isn't super helpful in those first iterations. It is to give you the shape of it, but you're going to have to make the first attempt. So yeah, I mean, it was a brutal first go for me. Taught me a lot of lessons, super humbled. And made me a much better product and engineer.
Yeah, and a great story about how regardless your craft, when you're building products and services for people, right, that human-centered design approach is so important. Bruno, what about you in terms of, as you were starting Pura, what were some of the challenges and successes that you faced?
I mean, the obvious challenges, I don't come from technology, right? As I mentioned, I know cleaning is super cool, but it doesn't translate tremendously into a consumer product or technology or fragrance for that matter. I guess very small amount of fragrance. But the hardest part was really like not having an understanding. I remember having a conversation. So my brother worked at Amazon, works at Google. So I don't remember which one he was at when I started. And I remember going to him being like, just very simply explain to me how a hardware product can talk to this cloud you're talking about and return to the phone. And so like I was like trying to like get the download on how this worked. And so it was incredibly, I mean, just it was very tricky at first, kind of jumping into something, have early meetings and say, let's get this off the ground, and not really understanding what we're getting off the ground. It's like being a pilot blindfolded in a plane and saying, you're going to fly this, and like, tell me what kind of plane I'm flying. Good luck. And so it's the only way that it worked is really like reaching out to industry experts. Like Nate was, I mean, honestly, guys, I'm honored to be on the same stage as Nate. Like this is a dream come true for me. To if you would have told me, you know, like 8 years ago, to say, hey, one day you're going to be sitting next to Nate talking about product, I don't know if I would have laughed or cried, because I mean, Nate was one of the ones that I think our first real like advisor mentor that we reached out to and said like, hey, how do we do this? And you know, he was a busy guy, but he took some time. I remember having a conversation with one of our investors, and he's like, Nate's taking time to help you guys. Why? You know, because Nate was and still is a very, very busy guy. I was like, I don't know, he's dumb. He fell for it. But but I mean, he helped us tremendously, honestly, like trying to grasp and trying to understand. And I know sometimes probably was frustrating to be like, how can you not understand what I'm saying? But it's really just reaching out to experts and to going out and just beating your head against it till it makes sense.
Yeah. Hey, so Bruno, just for frame of reference, give a ballpark, but how many Pura devices are in the world right now?
In the millions, so 1 point something million devices.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you know, he's very kind, but like if, you know, a couple of lunches doesn't create that. Like
some dinners
yeah,
in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's being pretty shy, but if you look at, like, can I talk a little bit about your tech? Because I think it's like super insanely cool.
Friend DA here, right?
Yeah, friend DA. Well, I won't give the science away, but I think, you know, fragrances and smells are interesting, right? Like human beings, you have 5 senses. So he always tells me like the fragrance of smell is the only fragrance. I mean, the smell is the only sense that's connected to directly
the cortex of the brain.
Yeah, the cortex of the brain. So, you know, like Ratatouille, if you have this relationship with a smell, it takes you back to these childhood memories. It brings all this stuff up for you. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. But what Pura ultimately did here, which I think is awesome, is one, they gave you the magic of reaching into the future. If something smells horrible, you can make it smell good. Like I have 4 sons. When we had little kids, a lot of diapers. And so you're trying to clean up rooms and smell, or, you know, food, like whatever. So that's cool. But if you kind of just go to this other side of mental health and you look at what fragrance can do to, you know, take somebody and put them in a non-stressful state with lavender. Like there's a lot of really emotional help and healing, but the science that sits behind Pura, which I was just fascinated by, like when Bruno and Richie and Mike and the team sat down, guys, they can take a smell like anywhere out here that sits on the side of the hill, and in 90 days, they can put that in a diffuser that sits in the side of your house. Like the technology to go out and bring together all of these different fragrances is a very powerful thing, especially if you know how it connects the interface to the human body. And this is literal. Like, it's not like me playing with an app. Like when I get a smell, it changes my emotional state. It changes my composition as a person. It changes my family's attitude. And then you start to apply that technology to like Disneyland. So you're sitting on a ride and all of a sudden things start smelling like, you know, clouds, or grass has just been cut, or whatever. It is just like a really awesome use case of using technology and innovation that literally touches, you know, the human being.
And if you buy now, it's 20. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I love this. And it reminds me, when I was back in high school, I was really into psychology. I had a friend that was doing this experiment, got hooked up to everything so that they could basically, her desire was to test how do your brain waves change when you smell different things, right? And it was measurable. And so I'm curious, when you're working to build an experience like that, what are the types of, like, how do technologists, like whether you're a product thinker, you're a designer, you're an engineer, how do you have to think about those problems?
That's a great question. I guess it comes down to like what problem exactly we're trying to solve. On the fragrance side, we work, I mean, the amount of bodies that goes into each fragrance or each technology, everything that we do is still shocking to me and shocking to our CFO every time we pay the pay the salaries. But it's just the amount, like, because you have to get involved not only like our internal core fragrance team, but then we have a perfume, the perfumers and the scent scientists, and then you have the scent evaluators, and then on top of that, you have the toxicologists that basically go and check everything, and then we have an external group that does they call it weight loss testing, that checks everything to make sure it's on par, and then you have an external group that basically double checks that all our ingredients and formulas are as promised, because we work with the 20 largest fragrance houses. And so it's like, all in all, I mean, there are hundreds of bodies into each of these things. And then when you get to a level that you're talking about, because we have certain fragrances that are like, hey, we do clinical studies to see, like, does it increase the rate of sleep, increase REM? Does it reduce stress? Does it increase confidence, right? There's all these different levels that we actually do, and we put it on specific fragrances. That's a whole nother level of like science, and you're talking about all the pros, those different things. Like, those are things that we do, CAT scans, MRIs, and these different aspects. It seems absurd, and it is absurd to anyone not in this industry, but it is very common on the day-to-day of this kind of fragrance aspect creation that we do.
Yeah, and it seems like with the ability to create such an impact on people, there's also maybe an overlay of how ethics comes into play. Is this as well when you're building these types of products, right? Can you speak a little bit about that from both your perspectives?
Oh boy. Man, I have like so many cool use case examples that you guys probably know well, but yeah, I think, you know what, so if you don't know it, do most of you, just by raise a hand, no, not, you guys can't raise your hands on this one. It's like a nod. Do you guys know what Torus is or Torus does? Yeah. We're not a solar company, just so you know. We are an energy storage and management company that pairs itself with renewable solar, wind, or hydro. But I think what is really, really important here is that this boundary that you're talking about, kind of the moral and ethical boundary, you know, at the end of the day, Torus is experienced like a micro utility company. So, you know, the power generation, use, and management that goes across that household, you know, matters a ton to us on how that stack of technology gets deployed. And so, you know, one thing that I like to talk about here is vendors. You know, the people that you choose to build your stack of technology has to go through a ton of certifications. And you want to make sure that you're partnering with very reputable vendors, that you do a lot of research on where your hardware, where your firmware, and where your software is built, specifically where it's built. And at the end of the day, you want to use very large incumbents with big security teams and a lot of infrastructure to make sure that those systems and tools and methods are protected well. And so, you know, we picked like AWS IoT, like that is a platform that's FedRAMP compliant. I mean, that is a hardened institution, and you can count on the reliability, scalability, and the security of that product. And then, you know, you hire world-class talent. Most of you guys know Trent Bond. So Trent Bond heads up security for us. And yeah, and you're on it. You're on it every second.
I just heard what ethics was. I just learned what. I'm just kidding. No, it's ethics. Here's the thing. It's one of those things that's like, you gotta, there's like the day old, you know, the age old kind of saying, it's like, you have to decide today that you're going to be ethical in the future, because when the moment comes. And so this is kind of what we've decided as a company, obviously on day one, but it's much easier to basically do it early on, because what happens is there's been times where we've kind of talking about, like, we have the external group that does toxicology, does all these different things and comes back. And there's been times where, I mean, for those who don't know, the fall holiday season is a huge holiday season if you're in home fragrance. I mean, it typically a couple months make up like 50% of your revenue for the year. And there's been times where our toxicologist comes back and we've literally manufactured, I mean, the fragrance house we work with the 20 largest fragrance houses in the world. They're the ones that do all the fragrances for Dior, Chanel, Estée Lauder, Le Labo, you name it, they do it. So you imagine, hey, everything is above bar, and 99.9999% of the time it is. But every once in a while, there's a human mistake where they don't know that you've excluded an ingredient, or you have a certain report of things that you don't allow in your fragrances. And we have the strictest guidelines that I've ever seen. So I can't say like for sure, but the strictest guideline I've ever seen, or any of the fragrance houses have ever told us in the industry, of what ingredients we do or don't allow into our fragrances, because we believe there are side effects and there's different things that we just choose to stay away from. And so there's been times where our toxicologists will run an external report and come back and it's like, hey, did you guys already manufacture the product? Yeah, it's sitting in the warehouse, ready to ship. It's fall. We're stoked. We're so excited. We just threw a party. What is it? What do you want to tell us? And they're like, well, bad news, right? It's like, those fragrances include this one ingredient, but don't worry, it's such a minimum amount. No one's going to notice. There's zero clinically proven. It does nothing. But it's like, look, I know it does nothing and does this and all these things you're claiming, but we've made a claim to customers and we've made a promise and we've done something, and customers may never see, because we can't post and say, good news, guys, you know that super fragrance that we were talking about? We're not going to do it. So we basically have to pull. There's been many times where we had to pull fragrances, take a loss, take a kick in the pants to basically say, like, we lost this, and there's no marketing we get from it. There's no fun side. It's literally 100% downside. But as a company, we just decided, like, you can't choose when you will or when you won't operate ethically. It is all or nothing, right? Like the moment you toe that line, all hell breaks loose, right? Like you have internal problems, you have people stealing money. It just is, it's a black and white line that you just have to choose. We will not tease this, and it is black and white.
Yeah, yeah. Bruno, one of the things that you were talking about in terms of that sort of end-to-end life cycle of the research and development that goes into this, there's a lot of coordination, collaboration, communication that has to happen across various different disciplines in the business, right? How do you think about creating the systems, the processes, the resources, like to create that effective orchestration?
I'll tell you when we get it. No, it's you know, there are a lot of roles, and I would say some of the, I don't want to say like, oh, the more important ones, but I think like a product manager. Obviously, when you're talking about the hardware product, we have a lot of products. We just launched one this week. We just launched a new product in the car space. So having the product manager that kind of owns that aspect. And then in addition, we have a project manager when it comes to like inner team relationships, where it's like, hey, this fragrance has to go into this car and this brand is selling it through retail, where all of a sudden you have business development team, the fragrance team, the hardware team, the software team. And so you kind of have the product working with some different ones. And so we essentially are constantly, I mean, it's a living document. Like, I honestly can't give you an answer saying like, this is exactly how we do it. I can tell you how we do it today, right? Which is like, this is, as of this moment, how it worked for us to launch this latest car device. And now we're like, well, okay, well, we have a new device that's launching in the fall. And so I was actually talking to Mike, who's here. He's our CXO back there. Mike Baird, shout out. If you want a job, go talk to Mike after. Don't talk to me. I'm just kidding. But it's we were talking about this yesterday, where it's this aspect of like, okay, what's the postmortem of this car launch? Let's talk about this so that we don't make the same mistake with the next one. And so it is a constant living exploration of like what's working, what's not working, because the technology is improving, the AI is improving, how our developers are developing or improving, our team is growing. So it has to be a constant living document for that.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point on AI in just a minute, but Nate, I'd love to hear from you on that same question.
Yeah, mine's probably a little different from the chair. I'll come at the question like a different angle. It's more about maturity of the organization. There's just like at a really early stage, like an early stage at Torus when you're 8 employees, and you know, we're talking every single minute, every single day. Like it's a pretty loose social contract. That's really, it's who's on the team, what's the social contract we have between each other, and you know, you're just expected to perform against that social contract. When you start to grow and scale, and I think when you start to have like huge intellectual property that's invested in like large systems and tools, you have to build a framework. And the framework that I'm a huge proponent, I could talk for hours about up here, should be a customer-centered framework. The problem is that hardware, firmware, and software companies like just double down how hard the problems are to solve. And sharing tribal knowledge across the business is the reason why these companies slow down and they get internally focused on metrics. And they're really just intrinsic metrics to basically look at retention or revenue. But they're not looking at overall customer happiness or likelihood to buy or length of stay or like, you know, are we really building products that matter? those systems and tools are built for frameworks that support internal business KPIs. And so I just, I hate that. Like, I just think it lives in our companies that we work in today. We need to try and get as much of that out as possible, and then get people really, really focused on the problem, and then build systems and tools. And then the last part is just like single points of failure. So like a good single point of failure, as a good example for you guys, is inside of Torus, like one of the hardest problems that we're trying to solve is really on two roles. One is power engineers, and the second one is firmware engineers. Firmware engineers is the stitching. It's the glue between software and product and user experience. And it's actually just, when you dive deep into the firmware world, a firmware engineer is like a software developer, and then like a hardware engineer. Like, honestly, they understand hardware just as much as they understand software, and they're a little bipolar, back and forth. Really, I mean, it's you're having conversations that are very sophisticated. They're very deep knowledge workers, and they hold a lot of the intellectual property of the user experience and engagement across your product. And so setting up systems and tools around moats that have to get information out to the organization so you can stay focused, you have to understand that, like, right out of the gate. And there's an inflection point from social contracts to that level of scale when you need to start instituting it, and not be too heavy-handed. Because if you're too heavy-handed, people get out of daily workflow. And you guys know, if you have a meeting full of calendar invites, you as product managers, like, we're cognitive. Like, it takes a lot of time for us to produce a solution. And so to put our minds in workflow and then solve that problem is difficult. And so you have to give people the space. And so I, super obsessed with, when you do it, how much do you do, and then where do you build moats to keep people always focused this year or 5 years or 10 years down the road, so that it's sustainable.
Yeah, this could be another panel discussion.
I could talk for hours about it, for
Yeah.
sure.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to go back to the point that was made about AI, and so with improvements in this space, and of course Chat GPT and all of the things. But how are you seeing that influence the space you're working in? Like, what does that mean? What's on the horizon? How is that impacting things today and next?
I'd say Nate is using it probably to a really great degree right now. I can chime in, but
Well, and I mean, I did it. You guys saw my post on LinkedIn, but everything. It just seems like, I don't know, these mega trends out here. So ChatGPT is legit. Like, I feel like it's going to be very, very legit. And so it's not like we're banking on building our entire technology strategy on ChatGPT, but I mean, there's insane use cases for it. So one great use case for Torus, our product has really high price points. So, let's say between $35,000 and $50,000. That in our world is called a considered purchase. What a considered purchase means is that a person is going to research our product for up to 6 months before they buy. So, like, how can ChatGPT help there? Well, ChatGPT, if you add that service in direct web checkout while they're going through a buying behavior, a buying decision, and you can give them any and all information on renewables to help build confidence against that narrative, it is extremely helpful in conversion. And so incorporating, basically an engine into direct web checkout that a human being can interact with, so they fully understand power generation, power use, power storage, like, explain a kilowatt hour. Like, nobody has a clue what a kilowatt hour is, or a kilowatt or a watt. It just breaks down these barriers for you, and you don't need a giant team to manage direct web checkout 24/7, especially internationally. We have a lot of interest in Europe, and we're in Utah, and we're small. We're just a little crew, 65 people, 80% engineers. We're not great at interacting with human beings at that scale quite yet, and so ChatGPT is an awesome experience for us thus far, and we really do look to other opportunities to integrate.
I mean, the way that I see it, and the way that we've talked about it internally, I mean, it's the moment it kind of started coming out, right? Like, internally, it was like, we need to meet about this. We need to talk about this. What does this mean? The way I see it is, to Nate's point, it's like, do I think it's going to replace people today? No, but I think it can augment. Like, I should say long term, I don't know what it will do, but short term, rather than saying like, oh, we don't need engineers, we can use this. Really what it does is a tool that the engineers that you have can now extend the amount of work that they're doing, rather than hiring additional headcount, right? So you go from having hiring 2 additional engineers, so having one really good engineer that knows how to use the AI really well to extend the amount of work he's doing, to have that kind of help balance what he or she is doing. And so that's kind of how we've started working, right? It's like, hey, how much of this, because everything we do internally is custom. And so how much of this can we use? And so we're looking, I would say it's much more early stage in our company than even Nate's company, the way that they're using it, partly because, to his points, like when you're a smaller team, you can try a lot of different things. And I'm not saying a small team, that's a fantastic size, 65. So that's kind of how I see it. It's more augmenting the amount of output that your team's doing right now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for the crew here to ask some questions. We have, I don't know if Jeremy or Ben or someone, there's a mic here that we could run that. That way, folks that are online can hear any questions. And if there's any questions that come in online, we can take those as well. Any questions? Yeah, right in the back.
Literally the opposite end. Just throw it, buddy.
Yeah.
I don't know if the online people can hear.
Yeah, you'll have to have the mic so they can hear.
We're praying there's millions of people online listening. So it's
It went viral. I guess my question is this: both of you come from very diverse backgrounds, and then you've kind of slid into this firmware, software, hardware. And I know, Nate, you had a little more background in hardware in some areas. And when it comes to not just switching industries, but switching the type of products, right? Like you could have Pluralsight education software, and then now you're swapping both industry and software to hardware to this firmware complexity. What advice do you give to somebody who's coming in and relatively, like, Nate, I don't know your full background, but I'm guessing you weren't an electrician working in homes of solar power trying to conserve renewables, right? Like you're entering a new industry. What advice would you give for somebody entering a new industry and trying to drive this social good impact or create a new product while still being customer focused, but recognizing and trying to like level up where you don't understand things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the basis by which I make my decisions is kind of core values based. So mission and vision, and then, how does my kind of core values align to the mission and vision? That's how I make the decision. And so if you look historically at my career, whether it was in fire and emergency medical services, or if I had a stint at OC Tanner, which is rewards and recognition for the human being. Cycle Face to Strava was about, nutrition. And again, you guys know I'm a crier, so I probably will cry during this, but long story short is when I built Cycle Face and I'd sold my company to Stryker, when I started Paramed, I was 136 pounds. When I sold that company to Stryker, I was 317 pounds. And, I struggled physically and mentally to overcome a lot of personal barriers. And I did that over the top tube of a road bike. And so I cried a ton on that bike. I'm just trying to unpack the decisions that I made entrepreneurially and selling to a big, Fortune 100 company. Plus, it was heavily regulated. So that is an FDA Class 2 medical device business. And that was a ton of stress for me. And so the meaning of the work, reducing back injuries in EMS, 80% of fire and EMS personnel reduced their back injuries in the first 3 years of the use of these products. So, I mean, I gained a lot of personal satisfaction. I never wanted to go in medical devices ever again. I never want to see the industry. I get called all the time, no, I don't want to go there. So I know what I don't want to do, but I do know that the future to me looks like helping humanity. And, Torus is the best way that I know how to do that right now. You look at what's going on in our planet. I have 4 sons. I think their life is going to be different than the life that I had, mostly because of the decisions that I was making and my parents was making. And so if there's any way that I can contribute for decarbonization and savings and energy independence and grid stability, because we're electrifying everything, I want to contribute the rest of my career to that. And so to me, this is the last chapter for me. This is, I think all of these relationships, even the people in this room, in this community, has built my personal career to this moment, and to build with this group of people and try and go take this down. Now that is N of one. Like, this is my personal conviction to the company that I'm building right now. There are so many other people, man, that are just building amazing, amazing companies. So for you to choose, I think it has to start there. The last thing you're probably really getting at is like skill set. Like, how do I get my skills there? I look at everyone in here. Everyone has the hard skills. It's actually just the mental barrier of you thinking that you can apply your skills that you have. But honestly, I knew a little bit about electrical engineering. I know a lot about electrical engineering right now, and it's because I dove in with everything I have to pour over that knowledge, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, month over month, just to understand how it works. And you can do the same thing. Like, anyone can do it. Yeah.
If I could just echo what Nate said, like, it really is like that passion's like first step, right? Like, how do you learn? How do you do this? I guarantee you there's a lot of people here that love football, baseball, soccer, and you didn't go to school for it. You didn't have a job about it. You just fell in love with it. And so it's like, I ask you a rule, you can tell me. I ask you this, and some people are like, what do they call it? Like couch quarterbacks. I don't watch football, so I don't know the term, but it's right. It's like, I think if you're just passionate about something, you can learn and be really good at it. And if you're not passionate about something, you should think about it twice before you decide to choose that career choice, especially if it's to fund a company and to start that, be a founder of one. If you're not passionate about it, I really would encourage you to think very long and hard about it before you jump into it. But I'm not the biggest proponent of education, of school. Like, I think education, I'm a huge proponent. I'm not the biggest proponent of going to a physical location and paying someone for a piece of paper. So I'm saying, like, you can learn a lot from home. And obviously we're in Pluralsight. This isn't a plug for Pluralsight, but but I'm saying, like, but if you sign up now, no, but honestly, but it's just this aspect of, like, if you really are passionate about something, you want to learn. Yeah, you got the.
We might have a role for you.
Yeah, there we go. Yes. But I'm saying, like, honestly, it's like, if you want to move into a different location, want to move to a different career, like, just jump online, just study it, do this. Because I did a manufacturing engineering and took 4 or 5 years, and I also had to study philosophy and art and all these things. And it's like, I don't use any of that, right? The actual manufacturing, you could probably condense that pretty tightly into a short period of time. So if you're like, I want to move into product, or I want to move into electrical engineering, mechanical, you could probably condense that and learn online a really, really huge amount into a very short period of time and jump in quickly.
Nate, you talked about the pitfalls of turning internal and focusing on internal metrics versus disseminating that information out. Can you give an example of what you're talking about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, retention is, I always go to retention dollar-based. So an internal metric that gets focused on in B2B enterprise SaaS is, revenue, billings, bookings, and then dollar-based retention. So we get obsessed over those metrics. But one metric that would kind of just completely flip it on its head and doesn't get talked about a ton, and if you're a company that's doing this, you're amazing, but it's user-based retention. So user-based retention is the leading indicator to all of the cash, because if your cohort retention for user engagement is down, they will churn, trust me. And so, but because we're such a sales and marketing and revenue-based like mindset for for-profit businesses, ironically, where people have completely unpacked this, 501(c)(3)s. Like, if you look at, charitable organizations, they look at user engagement relative to donations, and they start with user engagement over donations. So they're a great business that sets up infrastructure, what I think, from based off the human side of it, and that usually is the reason why they crush donor goals, is because they know the right donors who have the right amount of money at the right amount of time to, feed capital back into their businesses. And we should do the exact same thing, in companies.
All right, we have a question online.
Great.
When considering digital versus physical products, what is the importance of a cohesive experience? So, for example, plugging in a Pura into the wall, then using the app.
The second part of the question was when considering physical versus, sorry.
Yeah, so when considering digital versus physical, what's the importance of a cohesive experience? So you plug the device in the wall, then you use the app. How do you connect those two, and what's that cohesiveness?
How important is the cohesiveness? Is that what you're saying? I mean, obviously I'm a little biased here, but extremely important. I mean, it really depends. Again, and go back to what I said earlier, it depends on the product. Again, like, we try to solve we band-aid everything with IoT, and that can be an issue. But it's I think the cohesiveness of like the experience that we're trying to, I mean, the era that we're moving into is very technology based. It's very phone based, app based. And so customers have learned to expect a certain experience from products and from their life in general. And so having that be cohesive and having that be just intuitive and connected is very important to overwhelming majority of customers. And so as you're considering it, I mean, I can't see a world where it isn't extremely important, but I mean, maybe Nate has a better answer than me.
Yeah, I don't know how many more questions we have.
So I think we have time for one more if anyone in the audience has a question. All right.
I've just been, and this might be more specific to Bruno, but I've specifically been wondering for those that are trained maybe more classically in computer science and don't have the experience with the kinds of technologies that an IoT company would use, what kinds of specific things would you recommend that potential for future employees study? Like, for example, Google's Matter framework, or like low energy Bluetooth communications or other communications. Just what could you advise?
I mean, all of the above. Honestly, it's the more it really comes down to how much work you want to put into it. Because the more that you put into it, the more you'll send out. And you're specifically asking about from the employee perspective. Is that what you meant? So it's absolutely right. As we're looking for different employees, if we have a gap in our knowledge base, and then you get an employee coming in saying, yes, I know how to do this, I've studied this. If you have experience, even better. But if you're like, hey, at least I've spent quite a bit of time doing this, and I'm partially trained in this, that fills a gap that we have. It could be the difference between getting a job and not getting a job, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, low-level languages. So anything in firmware that connects to any software, it's all communications. I think the base layer of the answer to this always lives in communications. It's kind of ironic that the core tendency of like what you would teach someone. So you know, I would tell somebody to get like a Raspberry Pi board at the very, like that's where you'd start, right? And then you don't need some STM32 chip to do all this craziness. And then figure out Wi-Fi, like low energy Bluetooth, cellular, like go to the base layer of the communications that connects things to cloud infrastructure. There's also a really cool tool. You guys know DevOps architectures a lot. But there is a tool that launched in firmware that I would tell anyone to study on a hard skill. It's called Belina. And Belina basically is Docker for firmware. So if you want to do massive fleet deploys across huge infrastructure, like, you know, whoever your firmware engineer, and it's crazy, like teaching them a gap to continuous delivery and discovery for like software development, lean, single piece workflow, right? WIP limits, all of that, to get them thinking to deploy and containerize firmware. That is a foreign experience for them because they are like C, low level C, and getting them to like Python and then containerize it and then do massive fleet deploys across that communication infrastructure. Like that's where you want people to live. Like it's an amazing set of skills that's being born out of this industry that's connecting, you know, software development and that role. And I think that's the magic. That's where I have the most fun, honestly, is watching a firmware engineer do container deploys across an entire fleet of Torus stations. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, this has been so amazing, and I've just been honored to share space with both of you as thought leaders, innovators, creators. I don't know if Ben or Jeremy, if there was anything that you wanted to say to wrap up, but I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thanks for being a part of this community, those that were able to make it in person and online. Like this is the future right here, right? So just appreciate you all for sharing space and coming together to create this opportunity to learn from one another. And let's give a round of applause to Nate and Bruno.
Thank you. Standing ovation.
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you so much for coming today, and thank you, Nate. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder about the events in April. A reminder about the events in May. There's extra food. Take food on the way out. Bags are free. Somebody asked if they were cost money. Bags are free. Just take a bag.
When is front again?
Front is 26th through 28th.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
Go to
There's,
front. It's going to be good.
Yeah, I failed to mention there's a product type discount, 30% off. There's an unemployed discount, 70% off. If you know anybody that does not have a job right now, please tell them. Really great companies, Discovery Plus, Microsoft, local companies, Lucid, Pura. Yeah, so it's great. So come. Thank you everyone for being part of the community. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.